Jennifer, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I've sent you the pictures of a book that we're probably going to use a little bit from just because I don't have the CD from the other book that we've been using. So I'll still be using that book, don't worry. But I'm also going to pull information from this other book. But I will always send you a picture and hopefully you can print them out. Okay? Or you can at least look at them and have an idea of what we're doing. Okay, so what can you tell me about China? What do you know? Anything about China, Brazil, or India? Right? Um, I think even if you don't know a lot about those countries, you know that they are big countries and the population of these countries are quite big, right? So, in what I sent you, which was this, right? It says the big question, is life better in the city, right? Most people live in the cities of China, Brazil, and India, such as Shanghai, Sao Paulo, and Mumbai, than in all the cities in the rest of the world. So could you imagine? That's a lot. Those are a lot of cities. So I can't even imagine. Maybe we'll look into the total and talk about it next day. Okay, so in activity two, we have the preview. And we have two photographs, right? I'll show them to you again so you can see them. Okay. You have the photographs and you have adjectives. You've got boring, colorful, exciting, peaceful, suburban, clean, noisy, and crowded. Okay, so you have the two photographs. One is in a remote, a very far, right? Countryside in Montana, USA. So it's very isolated. And then you have San Francisco, right? A street parade. So, which of these words would you use to describe the photos? Okay, so think of picture one and think of picture two. Right? I think most people would say that picture one looks a little boring. Yeah. Peaceful, suburban, clean, and the others would belong to San Francisco, right? Looking at the word crowded. Crowded is when there are a lot of people. Things are very crowded, right? Um, okay, so look at activity B. I want you to complete these sentences. Use a word derived from the word on the left. So you don't want to use these words specifically. You want to use this as a root and complete the sentence with the word that is similar to these, okay? So pause the video if you need to, and then when we come back, we'll correct it. Okay, so number one, I was completely bored with life in my remote village. Okay, they're both adjectives. There are two types of adjectives, bored with an ed ending and boring with an ing ending. How do you feel? I feel bored. Okay, bored, an adjective with an ed ending is how you feel emotionally, right? It is an emotional feeling. I am bored. I am tired. I am interested. Okay? Why are you bored? because this book is boring. This film is boring. Okay? This film isn't interesting. Okay? Something isn't ing, and so it makes you feel ed. Okay? I hope that helps. Number 2, people on mobile phones always talk noisily. Okay, let me move this down a little bit. Sorry, it's hard to know with the camera, right? Noisily. Okay, it's an adverb in this case. Okay. Number 3, you have 2 possible answers for this depending on your context, okay? The ideas of living in a big city excites me a lot, or excited me a lot. So it depends on if you think it's talking in the present or in the past, okay? Number 4, the gay pride parade filled the street with color. Okay. Now in the next activity, right, this one here, okay, this is what we're going to do now. Complete these sentences. Use words from this list to make a comparison. The arrow indicates if it's more or less. So you have expensive, hot, angry, exotic, and hectic. Hectic, very busy, right? Normally, big cities are very hectic. With this activity, you might need to remember your comparative adjectives. Okay? Your comparative adjectives, let me move this. And I'll move this down. Okay, so you might not see me so much, but that's okay. The board is the most important. Okay, so what are the rules if we remember? For example, hot. Hot has one syllable, okay? The same with small. Small has one syllable, small. When we have an adjective with one syllable, we add er, and then. This is when it's a comparative adjective and you are comparing two things, okay? With hot, right, you have consonant, vowel, consonant. So with this case, you have to double the T, okay? Hotter than, smaller than. Then you have adjectives that have more than one syllable. For example, modern. Okay, so for example, Lugo, well, no, Madrid is more modern than. Madrid is more modern than Lugo. And what is the opposite of more? Less. So Lugo is less modern than Madrid. That would be the opposite, right? Yeah, you can still see. Good. Okay. So when it's an adjective with two or more syllables, then this is the rule. But then you have another rule about the letter Y. For example, noisy. Okay? So because this ends with the letter Y, Okay. Madrid is noisier than Lugo. Okay, so if it ends with the letter Y, then you need to change the Y to an I. Okay, so these are technically the comparatives, that the rules that you need. Okay, there are some special adjectives that are irregular. Maybe you remember them, but we'll double check. Okay. Good. What is the comparative of good? Better. Okay. Good, better. Bad, worse. Okay. Far, right? I think we talked about this in class one day, but I'm not sure if you were there, right? Farther or further, right? Australia is further than Canada to Spain. Okay, so Spain is here and Canada is here, but Australia is over here, right? So Canada is, or Australia is farther than Canada. Okay. Also, we have the option if we want to use as. As. Okay. So in this case, let's see. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. Madrid is as exciting as Barcelona. Okay, so it's the same, right? It's the same. So here we use as an adjective in its normal form and as. I'll give you one that's a little bit more simple. Madrid is, again, I'm not sure if this is correct, but we're going to use it, is as big as Barcelona. Okay, so you have as, and this does not change. There's no conjugation of the adjective. Okay, big. Okay, so what I want you to do is complete the activity on, yes, activity A, okay, that I showed you before. This one here. And when you finish, come back and we'll correct it. Okay, so let's look at number one. Now, it might be possible that you have different answers to this, so don't worry, okay? But I'll give you these answers, and you can always send me the activity if you have some other ones, okay? Number one, the apartment in Hoboken was far less expensive than the one in Manhattan. After an hour and a half, the train was a lot hotter than when the power cut started. 3. The passengers were in a bad mood and became even angrier when no one came to help them. Street life in other cities is much less exotic than street life in San Francisco. And suburban life is not as hectic as life in the center of New York. Right? So the suburbs, right? Suburban life. You can live in New York City in an apartment, Or you can live in the suburbs, maybe 20, 25 minutes outside of New York City, right? Outside of the city, the suburbs, right? But if it's very, very, very far, countryside, okay? But if it's just on the outskirts, right? Outskirts, it's the suburbs. Okay, so a lot of these sentences are based on the reading on page 13. And before we go to page 13, look at the next activity where it says ideas. The following sentences are from reading texts on the opposite page. Read the sentences and answer the questions. Freedom sips to drink cappuccino in a sidewalk cafe in San Francisco. Nothing but peaceful fields of corn and cows for miles around. My clothes are ruined. Now I remember why I left the city in the first place. Then you have some questions. What is the writer saying about San Francisco? Where do you think people feel freer? In the country or in the city? Can you explain? Do you think the second sentence is a good description of life in the country? In your opinion, is the country a lot more boring than a city? Or do you like the peace and quiet of the countryside? And what do you imagine was the cause of the problem in the last sentence? Okay? So now we're going to go to page 13. Sorry, before we go to page 13, you can answer the questions, okay, and send me the answers, and I'll correct them for you. Now, on page 13, I'm going to play the reading. You can listen and follow along, and then we'll continue.
Big city. Activity 3. 1. San Francisco. Money lives in New York. Power sits in Washington. Freedom sips cappuccino in a sidewalk cafe in San Francisco. Joe Flower, American writer about the future.
People smiled friendly-like, and we knew we could live here. Los Angeles. That's just a big parking lot where you buy a hamburger for the trip to San Francisco.
John Lennon, 1940 to 1980. Rock singer, and Yoko Ono, born 1933, artist.
I never saw so many well-dressed, well-fed, business-looking bohemians in my life.
Oscar Wilde, 1854 to 1900. Irish writer.
But oh, San Francisco, it is and has everything. The lobsters, clams, crabs. Oh, cat, what food for you?
Dylan Thomas, 1914 to 1953. Welsh poet, in a letter to Kat, his wife.
2. New York.
When I was young, we went to live in a small town in the Midwest. It was the cleanest, most boring little town you can imagine. Nothing but peaceful fields of corn and cows for miles around. I decided to move to the center of the world. I mean, this is where you get interesting jobs and real money, right? I was really excited when I got a job in an advertising agency in Manhattan, right in the heart of New York. There was no way I could afford to rent an apartment in Manhattan, but I found a place in Hoboken, New Jersey, which was much less expensive. It was tiny, it was noisy, but it was mine, and it was only 45 minutes from the office. I started my new job on August 15th. It was really hectic. At 5 p.m., I walked to the subway. exhausted but excited. I got on the train. There was nowhere to sit down, but I thought, hey, what the hell? This is New York. 10 minutes later, the train stopped and the lights went out. There was a loud groan from the passengers. 1.5 hours later, we were still there. It was getting hotter, and the passengers were getting angrier by the minute. It wasn't just a broken down train. It was far more serious. The whole city had stopped. Thanks to a massive power cut, there was a blackout. No electricity from New York all the way to Canada. A guard told us to walk down the track and climb up into the street through a manhole. I came out covered in oil. A reporter asked me what it was like. This is my first day in a new job. I put a lot of effort into looking good, and my clothes are ruined, I said, pointing to my red dress, which was now black. It was then that I remembered why we left the city in the first place.
Okay, so now what I want you to do is activity B, all right, C and D. And I want you to do activity 4 as well for homework. Okay, so those 3 activities. Scan text number 1 and choose the more likely meaning for each of the following. Okay, so you have lobsters, bohemian, and parking lot. And C, highlight one keyword about San Francisco from each quotation. And D, look at the phrases in capital letters, right? So you have the center of the world. There was no way I could afford. It was really hectic. There was a blackout. I want you to look at those expressions, those phrases, and decide which of them describe New York, the result of a power cut, the cost of city accommodation, and city life. And then also, number 4. Now it says, use Language Bank 4. I also sent you a copy or a picture of this, right? It's this right here. Okay. So there are ways of comparing, right? And contrasting. So when you're talking about village and city life, okay, it's important to be able to compare different ways. So there you have some examples. Okay, use Language Bank 4 and answer. What are the strongest images from the 2 texts? So what do you imagine when you read these 2 different texts? What do you imagine first for each one? Does New York sound like a better place to live than San Francisco? Why or why not? And how does city life compare with life in the country? So I know with activity C, with question C, we've probably already talked about that quite a bit. But if you'd like to use some of the comparison and contrasting ways from the language bank, you could do that too. Okay, so that's it for today, Jennifer. I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.